Hello and welcome to another episode of The Frontier. This is your once-a-week program where we spotlight the ideas, technologies and industries that are redefining the future. Now, for centuries, space has captured our imagination as the ultimate frontier, an endless expanse that challenges what's possible and inspires us to push the boundaries of innovation. But today, space is no longer just the realm of scientists and astronauts. It's rapidly becoming a commercial and economic battleground as well, with new technologies and private players transforming what was once a government-only domain into a multi-billion, trillion-dollar global marketplace.
So why are we talking about space right now? Because we are at a turning point. The world is witnessing the dawn of a second space age, where falling launch costs, miniaturized satellites, and disruptive startups are making space more accessible than ever before. In India, this transformation is supercharged by bold policy reforms and a government-led push to unlock the sector for private enterprise. A move that could see the country's space economy grow fivefold to $44 billion by 2033. The shift is not just about rockets and satellites. It's about job creation, innovation, digital inclusion, with over 400 private space companies now active and space applications touching everything from agriculture to disaster management.
To take that forward, what is India doing to unlock this opportunity and bring the private sector into orbit? The government has enacted sweeping reforms, most notably the Indian Space Policy 2023, which has redefined the roles of ISRO, NSIL and the private sector. ISRO now focuses on R&D, while InSpace, that is India's National Space Promotion and Authorization Center, serves as a single window regulator and enabler for private space activities. For the first time, Indian companies and startups can build, launch and operate satellites, rockets and ground stations, access ISRO's infrastructure and even attract foreign investment. Regulatory clarity, streamlined authorizations and initiatives like the 1,000 crore VC fund and technology transfer agreements are already paying off, with landmark private launches, new Earth observation PPP models, and significant foreign collaborations.
So when we break down the commercial opportunity, India's space economy spans four broad segments. One, satellite services and applications. That's the largest and fastest growing, including communication, remote sensing, and navigation. The second one is satellite manufacturing. The third one is launch services that basically send the satellite into space. And the fourth one is ground segment operations and data services, the physical infrastructure on Earth.
Reema, in each segment actually seeing rapid innovation and rising private sector participation, with downstream applications now accounting for the lion's share of value creation. Now, guiding this new era in space is Dr. Pawan Goenka. He's chairman of InSpace, a veteran corporate leader, a leader whose vision and execution are helping position India as a global space powerhouse. Dr. Goenka, great to have you with us here on the program. Thank you very much for joining us. We kind of sort of envision this program as Space 101 for our viewers who may be lay people who may be interested in the sector. We certainly are very much. So thank you once again for joining us, sir.
Sure, my pleasure.
So you've set a $44 billion target for India's space economy by 2033. Break that down for us into segments. Reema sort of mentioned some segments, upstream and downstream, but we want to hear from you. Which will be, according to you, the biggest value creators?
So Prashant, first of all, let me say that you and Reema have done a very good opening summary of what is happening in the space sector, and that is the Space 101. In terms of just giving a little background of where we are and where we are headed, the $44 billion is a number that InSpace has done after a lot of internal work at what are the potential that India has and how we will go from 8 billion to 44 billion, which is a fairly significant leap of 5x in 10 years. Now, today, the largest segment that is contributing to the 8 billion is the communication segment. We have dozens of communication satellites up in orbit, some owned by Indians, not mostly, all of it by ISRO, which now is owned by NSIL, and some owned by foreign entities who give services to India. As we look forward to what will happen to the communication, we expect the communication part to grow from 8 billion to about 14 billion when we are reaching the 44 billion. So still communication will remain the highest segment. And there, what will also happen is a lot more of data communication will happen. The backhaul, as we call it, the data requirement will go up substantially. And we are looking at the low Earth orbit constellations coming in. For example, the SES, the OneWeb, the Starlink, much talked about. All of these are slated to come into India very soon, and that's going to grow the communication segment of space economy in a big way, from 8 billion to 44 billion. But where we see the largest growth in terms of CAGR is in the downstream, the application segment, where currently we are perhaps at about a billion and a half of total value. That is primarily because this segment is served by ISRO and the primary customers today are the government departments and state and central government departments. Now, more and more, we are looking at the private sector companies coming in and providing these applications and grow this segment from about currently sub $1 billion to maybe about $8 billion. That means 8 times from where we are in the 10-year period. Now, when we look at this segment, we see enormous opportunities in how we take this space data that's available, and more will become available. We'll talk about it. And how do we convert that to useful information that businesses and the government can use to better govern and do a better job in business. Today, the government is doing it in a reasonably good way, but the businesses have not yet started using space data, and that's where we see the big opportunities. So that's the number 2 that we'll see. The third one is in the area of navigation. Now, all of us know GPS. All of us use GPS day in, day out in all our devices. But India has something called NAVIC that everybody may not be familiar with. NAVIC is India's own sort of what we call GNSS, that is navigation system, which is primarily used today for the military applications. But going forward, we see the NAVIC being used for civilian application, and that's when the value creation, economic value creation, will happen from about $2 billion to about $8-9 billion is what we see navigation to become in 10-year time frame. And there we see a lot of opportunities for the private sector, not to launch the navigation satellite. That will remain the purview of ISRO, but to use the navigation satellite to create the value addition, to bring in lots of devices that will be used in different gadgets to be able to use our own NAVIC in place of GPSs or in addition to GPSs to provide the navigation services in India, both for strategic defense users, which is already happening, and now for more of civilian use that will start happening. So these are the 3 top segments that I look at. Where the 4th one that I will talk about is manufacturing. Today, India is manufacturing its own requirements through ISRO, where private sector does play an important role, but mostly it is the end product is done by ISRO. Now, the private sector has started doing satellites already. We have about a dozen satellites launched by private sector already. We have the private sector coming into launch vehicles. We have 2 launch vehicles that are under development, 1 launch vehicle that got just transferred from ISRO to HAL. And all of this will grow the manufacturing part of space economy. And that we expect to reach maybe $4 or $5 billion out of the $44 billion. So these are the top 4 that I would say will be driving the space economy.
Mr. Goenka, that's very well explained and providing that broad framework on how that $44 billion is arrived at. So now, as we need to grow nearly 5x from $8 billion to $44 billion, what, according to you, needs to be done more? Do we need more by way of regulation, more by way of capital, technology, is skilled labor? If you have to turn this vision into reality, what more impetus do we need?
All of the above. We need to work on everything. So let me kind of summarize in space role in this. In space is a facilitator. We are not actors. We are not doing anything on our own. We are facilitating different people to do different things and bringing together a vision that will help to make sort of shape a space forward India that is globally competitive, commercially robust, socially impactful, and guided by a clear enabling policy framework. So that kind of summarizes areas that we need to focus on. So let me go one by one. And I think it's a very important question that you ask, because it's easy to say $44 billion, but it's not as easy to deliver $44 billion. And it's not one agency or one stakeholder that will make it happen. For it to happen, the private sector, ISRO, NSIL, central government departments, state governments all have to work together in unison, where in space will kind of be the glue that will bring them all these players together. Now, where does the private sector need help? Okay, the private sector needs help, number one, in creating demand, because today the demand is by and large with the government. There is very little, except in communication, there is very little private sector demand, and therefore we need to create demand for the private sector companies to be able to sell their goods and services that they're working on. And I can come into how we are working on these things, but let me first say what needs to be done. So first is the demand. Second is the skilling, because again, the space expertise is concentrated with ISRO. And how do we get the private sector to get access to that skill and develop its own skill going forward, so that private sector cumulatively has as much skill as ISRO does, perhaps 10 years, 15 years from now. The third is the capacity in terms of how much infrastructure is available, how much is ISRO doing, how much is InSpace doing, what the private sector needs to do, and where does InSpace need to come in and fill in the gap. Okay. Fourth is technology. Space is a deep tech as it can be sector, and private sector is working on many things. But how do we channelize in a sort of a more top-down way the technology requirements for space to move forward? And finally, nothing happens without money. So how do we bring in funding into the sector from private investors? And here again, government is playing a role with a 1,000 crore fund that we have announced, specifically focused for a space startup. So all of these things together, the demand, the capacity, the technology, the skilling, and the funding will come together to make the space sector grow in the hands of the private sector.
As they say, right? I mean, in every sphere of the economy, get the demand and everything else will follow. And you started with demand.
I've been saying that for the last 20 years, whether it's automotive sector or space sector, doesn't matter. All the sins are forgotten if the demand is there.
If the demand is there, everything works out. My question though is, right, this demand, I mean, for our viewers, again, I'm simplifying it, maybe dumbing it down. So government is the biggest user. So government, say, for example, wants a satellite up in the sky, in space. There is a private sector which does that for, carries a communication satellite to put it into orbit, into space, right? I mean, that's, so when we say the demand, but the demand is there. I mean, so it's just that demand is now being catered to by the private sector instead of the government sector, isn't that? Or do we need to generate fresh demand?
Yes and no. The demand is there right now from the viewpoint of how the government needs to use the space assets, right? There is not as much demand coming from the private sector, because private sector has not yet completely woken up to how private sector can leverage space technology to further their own business. I'm not talking about private sector in space. I'm talking about private sector in different other industries, how they can leverage space to further their cause. And even in the government circle, while there are all kinds of applications that are happening, but not to the extent that it is sort of completely spread out. So let me take a few examples to clarify. Let's look at satellites. Okay. Now we have three kinds of satellites that we launch: the communication satellites, the navigation satellites, and the Earth observation or remote sensing satellites, as we call it, right? The communication satellites are for that purpose, for broadcasting, for data storage, data transfer. The navigation satellite, again, are for that purpose. And India has right now, think about 7 or 8 navigation satellite, and we'll be launching 3 or 4 more over the next 2 years. And the Earth observation are the satellites that are observing the Earth, okay, as the name suggests. That means taking data and converting that data to useful information using application programs, okay? And that's where IT comes in. AI, ML, all of these technologies come in that on how do you take raw data, which actually, if you look at from naked eye, you cannot make any sense out of. You have to convert that raw data, which are in the form of pictures that are taken of the Earth, convert that to useful data, which goes into the
Right.
programs, application programs, and outcomes useful information. So let's say weather forecasting, disaster management, urban planning, agriculture, marine. In all of these, there is so much potential that can happen even for private sector where they can start using these applications. So if you have application requirement that will drive data requirement. And if you have data requirement, that will drive satellite requirement. And if you have satellite requirement, that will drive launch vehicle requirement, right? So even though the big value is in application, but application cannot happen without ground stations, satellites, and launch vehicles, right? So this whole ecosystem has to come together. Now, today, when we are launching, let's say, satellite for a specific need for a government department, these numbers will be in tens or 15s. To put in perspective, there are about 12,000 satellites currently orbiting in space, 12,000, out of which India has maybe about 150 or so, okay, which is less than a tenth of what China has. So if you look at the gap that we have today with China, with US, there is a lot more room for us to have many more satellites that are serving the needs of the Indian economy and Indian applications and the societal application that we have in India. Therefore, for us to generate that demand on data, so demand starts from data. If you have data demand, you have satellite demand. If you have satellite demand, you have launch vehicle demand, right? So therefore, we are working on all these three things.
Yeah.
The launch vehicles, we talked about it a little bit. The satellites, I mentioned about dozen satellites launched. There are a fair number of satellites that are currently under preparation and launch for strategic applications. And then there are things that we're doing with data, working with the private sector to bring the awareness in. Let me say one more thing, that currently the government departments are used to working with ISRO and comfortable working with ISRO, right? For them to start looking at private sector and have the confidence that private sector can deliver is also a step that we have to take, where private sector should demonstrate that, yes, they have the ability to deliver. And the government departments who are currently the primary users have to start having the confidence in the private sector to deliver. So for that, we are launching some pilot applications where we are funding it partially, the in space. And with that, we bring confidence in the government department. So you can see that everything has to sort of, it's like a big puzzle. And this is a puzzle are all interlinked. We have to put all of them together and make this puzzle a full puzzle.
Oh, absolutely. That's so well explained. You know, Dr. Goenka, allow us to take a quick commercial break and we'll come back and we'll ask you if there is a young person watching this program and they say, well, you know, all of us are fascinated by space, but some have the knowledge, the capability, the interest, the motivation to do something in this area. I mean, what part of this puzzle, as you put it, should they really look at? So we're going to ask you that. Take that quick commercial break here. See you on the other side.
Welcome back. You're watching The Frontier, and today we're getting you the front row seat into India's booming space economy, from rockets to revenue and the business of India's space economy, in conversation with Pawan Goenka, chairman of InSpace. Mr. Goenka, as we were getting into the break, we were discussing how this economy is now attracting a lot of entrepreneurs, startups. So in the entire value chain, which according to you is going to attract the most value? Which is the one which is emerging the most?
I think eventually it'll have to be data and applications. Right now, there's a lot of focus on launching satellites, a lot of focus on creating launch vehicles, which is obviously be the feeder. Without that, we don't have data, we don't have application. But finally, when we look at the $44 billion and see how much of it directly or indirectly is coming from data and application, I would guess it'll be more than half coming from that. Which is good news also in the sense that application does not require huge investment to create application, doesn't require huge investment, but at the same time, it does require understanding of not only space, but understanding of the sector that you're developing application for. I don't know if that makes sense to you. Like, for example, if you're doing agriculture application, it's not simply a matter of putting in some data and getting some output. You have to understand how crops work. You have to understand how pests happen. You have to understand what soil mechanism or soil mechanism is. You have to understand all of these things very well as technology before you can take space data and convert that into useful information to help agriculturists do a better outcome, higher throughput or higher output, less pests, less wastage and stuff like that. So it's a fairly involved thing. There's sometimes people take it like, oh, it's a simple thing. I'm going to write a program and wow, I'm done. I have an application. It doesn't work that way. You will have to really understand technology extremely well.
No, absolutely. But downstream, I'm assuming, Dr. Goenka, investments required are also lesser in that sense, right?
Yes.
To go
Absolutely.
upstream, obviously, is very, very capital intensive.
Yeah.
The rush into upstream in terms of launch vehicles, etc., Dr. Goenka, inspired no less by what we're seeing globally with
Yes, that is true
Musk and
because
SpaceX and whatnot.
yeah, because when you talk about glamour of space,
Yeah.
right? The glamour of space, what gets adrenaline flowing is not downstream. Okay, that is coming from seeing that rocket just go up in the sky and see the flames coming from the bottom. That's what gets everybody sort of excited, right? Not the computer program that one writes, which is the use of that technology, and therefore there's a lot of upstream rush right now. And it's rightfully so in India, because in India, the opportunities that we have from zero to a point in upstream is quite high. Just imagine that if all the satellites that are required to be built, except for satellites for scientific experimentation and except for satellites for highly sensitive military application, if all of those were to be built by private sector, the amount of money available on the table is quite reasonable, quite high. In fact, my rough calculation is that currently there is almost 50,000 crores worth of business coming from the government on upstream, sitting on the table. Okay, over the next 5 to 7 years, not in 1 year. So there's quite a bit of money available for upstream. India has up until now no private sector launch vehicles, right? Unlike SpaceX, which is now sort of ruling the roost in terms of launches, and therefore the Skyroot, the Agnikul, and the SSLV rocket through HAL create the core of private sector launch capability in India. And what we decided some time ago, that let's focus on small launch vehicles. Let's focus on small satellite launches. And if we can corner the globe, in a sense, become the global hub for launching small satellites using small launch vehicles in a dedicated launch pad that we are creating right now in Kulsakapatnam, then that becomes a fairly good global business for our startups. So therefore, upstream also has significant amount of opportunity available, at least for now. Maybe 10 years from now, a lot of it will be done, but at least for now, there's significant amount of opportunity available for upstream. And the other thing that I see in upstream is that once Indian private sector proves its capability and the world starts looking at India to meet the upstream needs, given that we are known to be frugal, our cost base always is lower compared to any other advanced country. I think we can get fairly good business in upstream from outside India. And therefore, I will not, for the time being, at least foreseeable future, say that upstream is not the way to go. Upstream is the way to go, and downstream will come from upstream.
Things like launches of service, etc., right? I mean, eventually, as that will happen. I got that. We have 30 seconds more, Dr. Goenka, if I can squeeze this in. Regulation-wise, is there anything else which needs to be done to kind of firm up this entire
There is
structure?
there's only one thing remaining. We have done the policy, we have done the FDI, we have done the NGP. The only thing remaining now is the Space Bill, the Space Act law, right? And that, as I've said many times, we're working on. It's going to take some time because creating a new space law is a fairly involved exercise with multiple dimensions to look at before we come out with it. Something that I would have never imagined when I was outside the government, but now I see the complexity of bringing in a law like that. So it's going to take some time, but that's not coming in the way of anything. Whatever we need to do, we are able to do, even without the space law.
Dr. Goenka, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for
I
having
hope
me.
you
I
will
really
come back.
enjoyed it.
You will come back to this program as we continue to track, as we put the private sector in orbit, in space. So that's our sort of a program for today on the frontier space, the final frontier. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.